Hi, this is my review of Godbound, a game of divine heroes, deluxe version. Godbound is quite unique. It's one of the most unique role-playing games that I have seen in a while. It takes an old-school Renaissance framework and integrates within it quite successfully indie game elements of character creation, character customization and development, gameplay mechanics that enrich the theme and make sense overall in such a way that everything is cohesive, because this is a game of the highest level of power imaginable, and because of that one would be somewhat afraid that everything would fall apart, but everything works quite well, quite efficiently. Now, what is Godbound about? It's about demigods who will reach the highest level of power if they are lucky and mighty. If you ever wanted to play a game where the party members were kind of like Gilgamesh and Hercules, that level of power and even more, then this is the game for you. Now let's talk about the quality. When you purchase Godbound Deluxe version, you get several files, different formats like EPUB and PDF, a lighter version of a PDF, so you will have no trouble at all, regardless of the portable device that you are using to read this document. You also get two character sheets, one standard character sheet and a fillable character sheet. However, the normal character sheet cannot be opened. There seems to be like a sort of an error, but at least the fillable character sheet, that is the most useful one, works perfectly. And when it comes to the PDF, there is a bit of a difference between the lighter version and the standard version. The standard version is a lot more colorful and quite nice to look at, but it could take a bit of a while to load on certain devices. But the lighter version works quite nicely, and it also looks pretty well. You just have like a few less colors here and there, and a lower resolution in some of the illustrations, but everything is just really easy to run in whatever device that you are using. And the PDF has a well-structured table of contents. You have bookmarks, there's hyperlinks all over the PDF. So this is a PDF that is incredibly easy to navigate, and the illustrations are really top-notch. They're quite surprising and impressive. Well, they surprised me quite a bit because this is one of Kevin Crawford's games, so you would expect all the illustrations to be old school, but here they have a modern fantasy flavor. They look really nice, they fit in with the theme and the setting. It's quite perfect in terms of quality, and you have a fully hyperlinked index, and everything is well written and explained. I just found a single typo in page 20, second column. It should be counted instead of count. I think that's, at least that's my take on it. And so the quality, top notch, the highest quality that you can imagine considering the scope of the game and the files that you get. Now let's talk about the contents. Godbound has a very eschatological setting, to put it in a way. You have this world with civilizations that were once quite glorious, quite splendorous. They discovered the secrets of Theurgy, which is a sort of like a very powerful, the highest level of magic that you can imagine, kind of like miracle making, so to speak. And they started wielding this Theurgy, and they started conquering everything. Soon diseases, pain, poverty, hunger, almost everything was conquered by Theurgy. So wars were waged with having ideologies and philosophies and utopias as sort of like the thing at stake. So there came about a point where everybody had his or her own version of a utopia or paradise, but they couldn't decide which one was the best. So they decided to ask God about it. So they wanted to get into heaven, but the angels were not very happy about it, so they had to storm heaven. This felt a lot like a dungeon raid into heaven, and they fought with the angels, killing a lot of them. Some of the angels have had to escape into hell. So it was war in heaven. When these wielders of 30 finally managed to reach the celestial throne room, God was not there. So it was a huge impact and a mystery. Why was there no God at the throne? Did God even exist? Or maybe did God get away from that place disgusted with his creations? Was God a hoax, set up by the angels? So there are so many questions, and one of the most important parts of this conflict is that throughout this war on heaven, the Thurgists created these gods, these artificial gods known as made gods. And the made gods were extremely powerful. Many of the things shaped during the war were created from the celestial engines and from the very fabric of reality. So now reality is dying, it's being torn apart, and much of that damage was caused by the made gods that feel a lot like divine golems. But these made gods were also destroyed throughout the war. Not all of them, but a good amount of them were eliminated. But their fragments, their essence, fell upon the realms below, and some humans were impregnated by this divine power and became the Godbound. That is the characters that your players are going to play as. So this is a very high fantasy setting. In Godbound, you have a party of extremely powerful individuals. At first, they are going to feel powerful, but not so much. But as you gain levels and resources and certain gifts, you will be able to take on nations by yourself. Even at the lowest level of power, you can face off against small armies by yourself. You will see how that's possible to accomplish when I talk about the rules. So this is a game about high power, about dreaming of the impossible, about being ambitious. And the entire PDF has a lot of tips and instructions, advice on how to use everything correctly. So for example, you even have tips on how to use a PDF file that you can turn off layers so you can it's a bit more printer friendly, or if you have trouble reading the document, you can turn off illustrations and such so that it loads quickly. So this is there's a lot of attention to detail throughout the entire PDF. Now when it comes to character creation, at first things feel somewhat standard from what you would expect from an old school Renaissance game. So you create your hero by rolling attributes or choosing from an attribute array of numbers. And these attributes, of course, will have an impact on whatever you do in the game when it comes to attacking or performing different checks and saving throws, because you have saving throws for hardiness, evasion, and spirit. And then you have to determine some facts about your characters, about your character origin, your past, profession, and how your character is related to factions and organizations. And this will give you a bonus during different checks. So this is really cool. This is one of those indie elements that I was telling you, that it has some impact on the mechanical side of the game with those bonuses to different checks, but you also shape your character and you create this living, breathing entity within the game. And then you have to choose words and gifts. Now the Godbound are godly because they have power over creation, power over reality. There are many different things, such as you have dominion over beasts, over death, over health, over journeys, over the sea, and each word that you are bound to has different gifts that you can wield as special powers. Some of them are passive, some of them are more active. I will talk a bit more about that later on, but your character feels like a shaper of reality. Now, wealth and equipment is handled somewhat abstractly. For example, when it comes to money, you're not going to be counting every single gold piece or silver piece. It's more handled as wealth points. And when it comes to armor, you don't have a huge list of armor. You have a few categories such as light armor, medium, heavy, and you can say that your character perhaps is dressed in leathers or hides or in heavy plate, depending on the category. And the cool thing is that when you equip yourself with armor, you decide to add a penalty to certain saving throws, so you get to choose which one of those saving throws are not very good for your character. So for example, maybe your character is wearing heavy plate and you say, well, this heavy plate makes me somewhat uncomfortable, so I'm going to get a penalty to my evasion and my spirit save and such. And with weapons you also have different categories. You have light, medium, heavy, ranged weapons, two-handed ranged weapons. And again, they're just general categories, so even if you choose to wield a scythe or a hammer or some kind of spiked chain, you can fit that into any of these categories, and you can focus on the type of character that you want to play as. And after recording some final touches, your character is ready to go and ready to conquer entire planes of existence if you want to. Let's talk about the rules of the game. The rules are somewhat similar to Scarlet Heroes, another game of Kevin Crawford that I really like, but it has some important differences. First, let's talk about the similarities. Scarlet Heroes is also a game of epic proportions, not as much as Godbound, but somewhat so. So here, when you make an attack roll, instead of rolling your damage die and counting the points that you dealt, you compare the roll to a specific table, and that table tells you how many points of damage you dealt. Now normally this wouldn't seem as impressive, but those points of damage take out entire hit dice of enemies. So instead of dealing 8 points of damage to a 4 hit die enemy, you could perhaps deal 4 entire hit dice of damage, and that enemy would be dead in a round or two. So this allows you to face off against armies of enemies and decimate them in about a minute or less in terms of rounds. And because you also have fray dice, which is like an additional die to roll, and it deals additional damage that represents like punching, kicking, elbowing your enemies, or some other type of fisticuffs, so to speak. You deal a lot of damage per turn, and this damage overflows. So if you kill an enemy and you dealt a bit more damage, that damage is dealt to another enemy next to that one. Maybe you cut someone's head off and your sword made a huge wound across the shoulder of another creature, and so on. So in that sense, combat is quite epic, but it's also quite familiar for those of you that have played other versions of perhaps Dungeons and Dragons. And you also have saving throws, of course, and morale checks when your foes start to lose morale and start to become afraid of you. They could end up fleeing from the battlefield. And you have details on death and dying. Now when it comes to dying, there's something called Divine Fury that I really like. When you are at the brink of death, you enter this sort of like a desperate state, and you have a limited number of rounds to fight like a machine of destruction and death, and you try to kill your enemy before he kills you, and it feels really nice and over the top. And with the Godbounds, the Godbound characters feel just too powerful, and that's a good thing for this setting, because for example, to put things into perspective, in Scarlet Heroes you felt that a single character could take on 1 or 2 levels of a dungeon with limited rest and maybe some resource expenditure. But here, with a single Godbound character, you feel like you can take on a mega dungeon by yourself. But of course, because the game master is aware of this level of power, he's going to design some very lethal dungeons filled with all sorts of eldritch horrors and godly enemies and traps. So you have many different details on how to use instant defensive miracles, holding actions in combat, combatants with multiple actions, all the information that you need. And you even have like quick references so that you can run games smoothly. Now let's talk about the divine powers. As I was telling you, you have these gifts that represent the words of creation. One of the cool things is that this breaks away a bit from the Bansian spellcasting that you would normally see in an old school Renaissance game. And it accomplishes this by having a system of points that you assign to different gifts. So for example, maybe you activate some sort of force field, and then you will have to spend dedicate a number of points to that power as long as it is activated or on. But the moment you turn it off, those points return to you. So that feels quite strategic in a way, and very cool, because it keeps that level of power of demigodhood. Because if you were spending points constantly and your resources will always be depleted, it wouldn't feel as godly. And let me tell you about some of the words of creation. For example, you have some universal gifts such as divine wrath. You smite a chosen foe within sight with the energies of the word, inflicting one excited die of damage per character level. And you have excellence of the word. This excellence is usually colored by the word that grants it. Fire that grants dexterity might cause sparks to be left behind with swift motion, while earth that grants wisdom might lend a ponderous and steady tint to your thoughts. So this, and you can see that this also adds to the color and the theme of the game. And let's see, you have the word of apotheosis, with powers such as hear prayer, because in this game, as a Godbound, you will become a deity, a god. You will have your own group of followers, even worshippers who will serve you, and they will communicate their wishes to you. You will be a creator and destroyer of civilizations. So some of these powers also allow you to communicate with them. You have powers such as gifts, such as Mark of the Prophet, attend the faithful, blessing the nations, to bless the nations. And you have greater gifts. So for example, in the word of artifice, you have the Maker's Eyes, perpetual perfection, reverence of steel. It says here, any clothing or armor you make for yourself gives you an armor class of 3 with no saving throw penalties. That's basically creating any sort of armor that you want. And then you have the word of beasts, and you have powers such as scent the prey. You may telepathically summon any of the animals to come to you as quickly as they can and in a safe way. And then you have greater gifts such as Lord of the Wild. Animals instinctively serve and obey you even to death, carrying out commands as if they had a human intellect. Or you have words such as death. Let's take a look at death. Some lesser gifts of death. Keeper of the graves. You learn exactly where every corpse, undead, or fragment of remains are within 200 feet and their identity in life. That's incredible. And then you have greater gifts such as Reaping Word. Commit effort for the scene and choose a target at any range. A gesture suffices if you can see the target, otherwise you must use a name they consider their own true name. Lesser foes drop dead and cannot be revived without your permission. Worthy foes require the effort, be committed to the end of the day, and are allowed a hardiness saving throw to resist. So you can basically kill anyone. And when it comes to lesser foe, that means foes that are inferior to you in levels of power. But in a battle between Godbounds, because you will face other Godbounds in this game, they are not considered as lesser foes, so they do get a saving throw. And all of these powers just feel incredible, miraculous, over the top. Like they can shift all the things that you would consider standard in reality. And the cool thing is that with your game master's approval, you can create your own words and gifts. So that's amazing, and I think a lot of the players will like that. There will be some players that will not like some of the gifts, or that think of different words of creation, and you can negotiate with the game master. But you have some really cool ones. Take for example sword, a lesser gift of sword, 9 iron walls. You have an invincible defense against all physical attacks until the start of your next round. And some greater gifts. Cutting the Crimson Road. Commit effort. Against foes of half or fewer hit dice than you have levels to a minimum of 1, your melee damage rolls are read straight and always maximized. So if you deal 10 in a 10-sided die, you roll 10, you deal 10 hit dice. That's incredible, and that's quite useful. So for example, when you face off against enemies that have 50 hit dice, that's beyond epic. Cutting the Crimson Road is going to be quite useful. You also have magic, theurgy, and spellcasting, because this type of spellcasting feels like some sort of ritualized version. Again, it steps away from the Bansian side of things. So some of these spells are kind of like rituals or ceremonies that could take hours or perhaps an entire day to cast, but they have very powerful effects, and you have all the information here to shape reality in any way that you want. You have different gifts by rank, because there are different academies and sects with different degrees, such as apprentice, adept, master, and archmage, and depending on your rank within that organization you're training, your spells will become more and more powerful. And you also have tips on how to integrate spells from other games. So it's just, that's quite nice. You have gifts, you have spells, you have so many ways in which you can play and affect the world around you. And you have a gazetteer of the realm, and it's incredibly detailed and just peppered with adventure seeds and campaign seeds. And you basically have a world divided in 4 great parts. Heaven, which is now completely devastated because of the war. You have the realms that they feel like the material plane, so to speak. You have hell and the uncreated night. And the uncreated night feels really interesting. Like you would have a lot of mysterious adventures there, because it feels like an eldritch highway of sorts, of eternal darkness, where there are these proto beings, these nightmarish creatures that were like the prototypes of creation, and they're always like preying on anyone who trespasses there. But sometimes that road of the uncreated night should be taken to reach different parts of the realms, or traveling between heaven and hell and such. And when it comes to the nations of the realm, each nation feels exciting, like you want to go there, to visit there and see what kinds of trouble or even treasure you can find. So for example, we have Ancalia, a kingdom fallen in on itself after a calamitous otherworldly invasion, plagued by warlords and wars. You have the Bleak Reach, a ruined exile land, where the refugees and outcasts have scratched out a hard, unlucky existence. Or you have the Thousand Gods, a god-plagued land of countless tribes who wield ancient theotechnical magic in service to their deities. And you have a lot of details, a lot of specific information for each of these areas. You have details on population, government, problems, the different names of the people, background concepts, etc. You will have no trouble at all shaping a specific campaign to your liking. Now this is a science fantasy game, as I was telling you, so there is an aspect of science. You will be able to wield guns and magical machines and such. So that again has a lot of versatility to the type of flavor that you want to add to your campaign. And you have the ways of the realm, with details on the people of the realm, languages, anything when it comes to religion, politics, climate, trade. Everything is right here. And as a Godbound, you have all the details to have your own temples, your own church, and you have information on the existing religions and temples. So for example, you have the Church of the One, or the ancestor cults, or the Doctrine of True Reason, that feels more like a philosophical organization, and you have details on lesser faiths, etc. You also have information on wars and conflicts, and you will be able to wage war against entire nations. As your followers grow and as your levels of power grow as well, you will be able to conquer entire lands. And you can have a small player's guide to the realm. That's quite nice. You have tips on how to run the world, creating your own campaigns, and this is one of the areas of expertise of Kevin Crawford. The author of this game is one of what I would consider a master of the sandbox style gaming. So anything that you can think of to create your own world, adventures, any little detail of that, on how to handle character exploration, how to handle rewards, everything is just perfectly explained here with the pertinent random tables, details on everything that you can imagine. It's just perfect. It's one of the, even if you didn't want to play Godbound as presented in the standard setting, you would be able to change that setting or to create your own setting with all these tools. An entire toolkit. You also have details on how to create challenges, changing the existing world, what types of Godbound calls exist. And near the end of the book, you have tips on, well, they're mostly like optional and additional rules to shape your... Oh, but before we get into that, I was almost forgetting this. Follows, of course, you have monsters and enemies that you will be able to face, and these enemies are titans, they are deities. You have angels, made gods, anything that you can think of, demons. All of the enemies here have a lot of hit dice, and they would be quite impossible for a mortal group of adventurers to defeat. But because you are Godbound, you will be able to fight several of these foes. It feels kind of like if you are entering a place filled with Balrogs from the Lord of the Rings, and you have a pretty good chance of killing them all with your powers. And so this is the highest level of power imaginable when it comes to the enemies. Okay, now what I was telling you about the optional rules. Well, when it comes to the optional rules, you have many things that can shape specific aspects of this game. So, for example, you could create mortal heroes. And that's interesting because maybe you have a group of followers and you decide to send them on a mission while your character is fighting against this created made god. So you could switch to a sort of like a secondary campaign or mini campaign where you play as your followers, and you'll experience this shift of levels of power as you play as mortals trying to survive against supernatural and epic enemies. You also have details on cybernetics and clockworks, and it's kind of like the transhumanist side of Godbound, that you can have these implants powered by science and magic, with all the details on rules and how much strain they put on your body, stuff like that. And you also have details on divine supremacy to become an archgod and to play a godly campaign. And one of my favorite section is the section of Godwalkers. These are basically like mechas. They're like giant robots that your Godbounds can pilot. But of course, as you grow in levels of power, maybe you no longer need these Godwalkers, but maybe you can arm your followers, create an entire army of Godwalkers. So that would be quite cool. You also have the martial strifes, which are basically like martial arts in Godbound that require a certain state of mind, gear, and techniques. You also have more details on running your own paradise, forming it, modifying it, claiming your own paradise. And themed Godbound, if you felt like the Godbound creation system was too universal, to put it in a way, you could choose Godbounds that have a specific theme that, oh, maybe you control time or the elements and such. So you have some examples such as the Arrayed, Elemental Science, Exemplars, Proteans, etc. And I'm not even covering all of the magical items and artifacts that are quite over the top. For example, you have like a seed that when you plant it, an entire city sprouts out of that seed, and that's just one of the artifacts. There are many more powerful things that you can find in this setting. Well, what do I think of Godbound Deluxe version? This game is amazing. This game proves once again that Kevin Crawford is one of the masters of the old school Renaissance. And because this is cross-compatible with any old-school Renaissance material and with the other games brought out by Kevin Crawford, it has that sense of endlessness, of eternal gameplay. If you like for example, the horror side of Godbound, you could take Silent Legions and grab some things from that game and put it here. If you want to enhance the science aspect, take Stars Without Number, one of its many supplements, and you can enhance the science fiction aspect of this game. If you want fantasy, add things from Scarlet Heroes. I could go on and on. But by itself, this is a game of great value, the highest content imaginable in both theme and its rules, because the theme is quite difficult to handle. You are playing as gods, you're basically gods, and things do not fall apart like they usually happen with more other epic level role-playing games. It kind of feels like all of your characters have the ability to wield limited wishes, for example in Dungeons and Dragons, or even wishes, but because of the way the powers are structured and all of the advice and tips that you get, this game keeps a good level of coherence and cohesion. And I actually saw relatively recently a new edition of a very similar game came out, and I saw that many things in both theme and rules were separated by different supplements, but here you have everything in just 241 pages. You have everything that you can think of. You want vehicles, if you want weapons, if you want enemies, if you want campaign setting, everything is just right here. So how does Kevin Crawford accomplish this? I think it's because he's very good at the economy of words. That is, he's not going to repeat himself all the time. He's going to tell you how things work rules wise, and you will understand that and you move on. And when he explains something about the setting or the background information, he tells it as it is and you move on. And so you get a lot of value, a lot of content. This is a game that will probably last you a lifetime. You could explore a single aspect of it and you will get many years of entertainment. This game gets my highest recommendation. I'm quite impressed. This game is really unique. And the way, as I was telling you, how it combines old school Renaissance elements with indie game character development and customization and developing plot lines. This game is amazing. You should get it immediately. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.